We just watched Donald Trump in plain sight extort millions and millions of dollars for himself in order to have his administration on the public side approve a financial transaction benefiting two of the biggest families in America, wealthy families in America, all that are Trump supporters. On one side, you've got the Sumner Redstone, siblings who own Paramount, who own CBS, who own 60 Minutes, trying to work a deal to sell their assets to make money in a true life succession to the family, the son, the Nepo baby of Larry Ellison, who owns Oracle, one of the richest people in the world and a huge Trump supporter. His son wants to buy the assets. What's the sticking point? Donald Trump had a phony lawsuit about CBS, about Kamala Harris's interview with Bill Whitaker. So what? Brendan Carr, who happens to be a lawyer, it's an important part of this story, got in the way, helped broker the hostage crisis, the payment, the extortion, the bribery that was required to be paid by Paramount, not just in cash, but in commitments from Larry Ellison's son to put on an equal amount, tens of millions of dollars of free ads for Donald Trump and his administration on CBS. Who's going to watch CBS or these streaming services at this point? And Brendan Carr being a lawyer is important. And on Court of History here on Legal AF, Sydney and Sean interview Seth Stern of Freedom of the Press. Fascinating interview. He just filed a bar complaint, his organization did, against Brendan Carr, because the guy happens to also be a lawyer and is not supposed to be a political hack doing Donald Trump's bidding to extort payments from corporations while he's doing his job as the head of the Federal Communications Commission. Let's look at that interview.
So what did Brendan Carr do then?
Yeah. Well, after months of negotiations and back and forth, Trump and CBS, as we all know, settled the lawsuit for $16 million. Why were they able to do that? Well, CBS, or Paramount, its parent company, had a merger with Skydance Media pending. Mergers need to be approved by the FCC. The FCC needs to transfer the broadcast licenses from, old company to new company. And it was widely reported that people at CBS believed that merger would not be approved by the FCC unless they were to pay Trump, unless they were to settle that lawsuit for a substantial amount of money. Now, of course, Trump could not credibly use the FCC approval process as leverage unless he had an FCC chair that would go along with it, an FCC chair that would withhold approval of the merger until the case was settled. And he had that chair, and that chair was Brendan Carr. Only after the settlement was announced did Carr hold a reported meeting with Skydance, the acquirer of CBS, to extract also unlawful editorial concessions. They promised to appoint a bias ombudsman and other such things that Carr has no business extracting from them. And only after, as I said, Trump tweeted out that he had received his settlement payment did Carr finally approve the merger. He could have done all of that anytime. He could have had his meeting with the Skydance folks a month ago, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, and then entirely detached the merger approval process from Trump's private lawsuit. That was well within his power to do, but he chose not to. He chose to operate on the timeline of Trump's private litigation so that Trump could use his agency's processes that are supposedly independent for bargaining leverage to extract bribes.
So he's also revived claims against NBC and ABC, hasn't he?
He has revived claims against NBC and ABC, including claims about the fact checking during the presidential debates being unfair to him, about whether there were violations of airtime requirements with Kamala Harris's appearance on Saturday Night Live. As I think you alluded to, he did not revive similar claims that had been dismissed against Fox News. Our position is that all of those claims were meritless, whether it's against Fox or whether it's against NBC. But he made a point of reviving the ones against the outlets that Trump dislikes and not the ones that, at least at the time, he liked. He's also gone after public broadcasters. He went after them on what should be a relatively minor thing, claims that their sponsorship announcements went too far and functioned more as advertisements that they weren't supposed to air. That would be a minor regulatory issue if it had any merit. But he, for no apparent reason, decided to use the letter inquiring about those issues to voice his opinion that public media should not exist. And that was complementary to the Trump administration's attacks on public media that we've seen since. So he's in any number of ways functioned as sort of a censor in chief, as some have said, and it's quite damaging. We heard recently, I mentioned Commissioner Gomez, the dissenting commissioner on the FCC, who has been very courageous in voicing her views and has gone on a First Amendment tour to sort of expose what's going on at the FCC. And she's talked about, broadcast licensees, and we're not talking about Paramount. We're talking about, small local stations telling her that they're afraid to report the truth because they don't want the FCC to come after them. It's what tax cheats say about the IRS. It's not what broadcasters are supposed to say about the FCC. The FCC is supposed to have no voice in content. So the chilling effect is enormous. And the thing with chilling effects is you never know how bad they are because you only know what news you see. You don't know what news you don't see. You don't know what ended up on the cutting room floor. So we'll probably never know quite how bad it is.
Yeah.
This attempt to go after content seems, and they want to make the media not just subservient to them, but actually parrot their own views and to keep views that are contrary to their own view. It's a lot what they're doing with the universities, tampering with the universities to make sure that certain kinds of views get expressed and that others don't get expressed. And this is really, talk about chilling. This is trying to turn the entire media into basically a trumpet for the Trump regime, which is frightening, beyond frightening.
Absolutely, and to make them pay a tax if they don't, if they don't abide, and the
not
idea
only a tax, Seth, but a bribe.
A bribe, a bribe, yes.
That's subject to the whim of Donald Trump.
Right.
And when ABC settled its case arising from George Stephanopoulos calling Trump an accused rapist as accused
adjudicated rapist, I believe,
as opposed to sexual abuser. And you can imagine if that case had proceeded, if Trump wants to prove damages, he's going to have to show that somebody would have associated with him or done business with him if he were only an adjudicated sexual abuser. But they drew the line at rapist because that's how it works. But anyway, ABC settled that case for $15 million and essentially set a market. There was widespread reporting that, the sticking point in the negotiations was that Paramount essentially wanted to settle in the same range that ABC did. They thought going too far above that range, then it would look like a bribe. Paying $16 million to file a frivolous lawsuit is one thing, but if they had paid 25, then that would have been too far from what ABC paid. Now, of course, when you're negotiating settlement of a meritorious lawsuit based on legal fees, based on litigation costs, based on risk, you're not thinking about what someone else paid in an entirely different case with entirely different facts and entirely different, laws applicable. One was a defamation case. The other was this weird consumer fraud case. The only reason you would be thinking about that is because you're paying a bribe, and the market rate for bribes was set by ABC. Now it has been set by CBS, and no question, Trump's going to go after someone else next.
Yeah, the thing about a protection racket varies. Sometimes if you just pay the money to the mafia and it protects you from breaking the windows of your storefront, let's say, you can continue to sell whatever you're selling, as long as you just pay up. But that's not the case here. This is beyond a protection racket. they want to determine what the content is of what this company is doing. So
yeah,
it's beyond what the usual mafia-like protection racket would be.
right.
Right, and Paramount gave them a perfect opportunity to do so because of the merger that Paramount desperately wanted to close, that Paramount's controlling shareholder, Sherry Redstone, had an enormous financial interest in closing, and that gave the Trump administration, thanks to Brendan Carr's cooperation, all sorts of leverage and all sorts of strings to pull. And as you're saying, it resulted not only in pay me my $16 million and then you can go back to doing your journalism. It resulted in pay me your $16 million. You need to appoint a bias monitor to police the editorial content on your network for something as subjective as bias. And you're going to need to air $20 million worth of Trump-friendly public service announcements, as Trump has claimed the new owners, Skydance, have agreed to do. And as far as I know, nobody at Skydance has denied it. So, if you want to talk about First Amendment issues, now you've got essentially everyone in America being compelled by the government to watch political propaganda on the public airwaves. That doesn't.
Well, if they gain complete control, but on the other hand, what they're doing is driving out journalism, so that through intimidation, so that people are not reporting the stories and that they should be reporting, or hedging what they're saying, or deciding what should not be covered. And I hear it all the time from people in journalistic news organizations.
What do you hear, Sid? Give an example of the kinds of things you've been hearing.
Well, people's language has changed. The lawyers are in charge. The lawyers act like editors, and they all act on the worst case scenario of being sued and the news organizations being threatened. And the selection of stories is in part determined by, the intimidation. So there's, people are, I have heard that there are stories that have not appeared yet about Trump and Epstein in major news organizations. There's a lot to report there on that deep relationship. But you've got, so Brendan Carr is certainly earning his pay for Trump.
Right, and that's just one line of attack. I think you're right. There are stories being either withheld altogether, watered down, placed on page 26 when they should be on page 1. Any number of ways that this administration is impacting editorial choices, particularly by mainstream corporate outlets that either depend on the FCC for licensure or depend on the White House for access. We saw what happened with the Associated Press for saying Gulf of Mexico. But that's really just one line of attack. One place where we know news is not being reported that should be is journalists who are not citizens of the United States, even op-ed columnists who are not citizens of the United States, who are afraid to report anything with their bylines on it. And they're just, it's not just that they're watering down their stories, they're leaving journalism, particularly student journalists. So the attacks on the free press are across the board. And I would, for people who say, well, it's not that bad because I can still pick up my paper or log into, the New York Times website and see stories that are critical of Donald Trump, so all must be well, we still must have a free press. That just because it's not as bad as it can be doesn't mean it's not bad. As I said earlier, we don't know what we're not seeing.
Yeah.
Imagine how bad it would, if you think Trump's getting criticized by the press now, imagine how badly he would be criticized if the press was.
Well, one interesting thing that your complaint points out against Brendan Carr is that they're even going, he's even conducting a campaign against online organizations, including a very interesting one called NewsGuard, which is a fact-checking news organization that Brendan Carr says is violating the First Amendment. This is, consistent with the overall attack of the right wing, that somehow anybody who fact checks and deals with the world of disinformation, which is also polluted with foreign adversaries and bots and propaganda, is somehow violating the First Amendment and freedom of the press. I mean, this is one of their new lines of attack. But here we are. Carr has sent letters to the CEOs of Alphabet, Microsoft, Meta, Apple, accusing them of being part of a censorship cartel, according to your complaint. Mm-hmm. So he's far beyond his jurisdiction here, isn't he?
Yeah. The FCC has no role in regulating online news content, nor does it have any role in regulating cable news content. He knows that, but he is threatening to do both. And he has already shown the country that he is untethered by the law, by the limits of his own jurisdiction, and willing to investigate things he has no business investigating. So sure, when Google or Meta gets this letter, their lawyers say, this doesn't make any sense. Brendan Carr has no business regulating us, but that doesn't matter. Brendan Carr can still make their lives miserable by investigating them and throwing them and dragging their names through the mud for the next several years. So they have incentive to capitulate. And, these are big corporations that don't care a whole lot about the First Amendment. And to the extent they do, they care about their bottom lines a whole lot more. And that's a problem that the administration has spotted and has seized upon. In the past, I'm not here to say that owners of news outlets 20, 30 years ago were morally and ideologically pure, but to the extent they weren't, they had business interests that aligned with a strong First Amendment. They had an economic reason to go to bat for their journalists. Now, ABC's, Disney's theme parks are worth a lot more to it than its journalists are. Paramount's movie studio is worth a lot more to it than its journalists are. So the situation is really ripe for journalism and the First Amendment being thrown under the bus to serve other corporate interests, and a weak, legally inadequate letter like the one Carr sends to online, companies, calling them part of a censorship cartel. Its legal shortcomings are besides the point. It serves its purpose of intimidating.
Can I ask a question about your strategy, just not to change the subject too much? But you're objecting. You're going after Carr, in effect, not as a public official, but as a lawyer, as an attorney. And then it strikes me that is an interesting way to think about how to fight back. That not everybody who's doing this kind of thing for the Trump regime is a lawyer, but many of them are. And to bring them to bear before the bar, if you will, is one way to point out, why the lawlessness is taking over. Attorneys ought not to be lawless, right? And that's effectively what you're saying, is that this is an attorney who is lawless, right?
Right. Look, I commend everyone who is bringing constitutional actions against this administration. That's certainly vital work. But at the end of the day, the administration gets to defend those claims with public money. And if it loses, so what? The status quo holds. When it wins, even 1 in 10 cases, then that just shows it the way. It shows it what door it can barge through. So I don't think it really bothers the administration all too much when you challenge them under principles or under constitutional claims. If you can hit someone in their pockets, it bothers them a bit more. And I don't know what Brendan Carr's future career plans are, but there's a revolving door. A lot of government regulators, after they're done in government, want to cash in. And in the case of attorneys, that is often at a big law firm where you can get a lucrative draw as a partner. But you can't do that if you don't have a law license. And Brendan Carr should not have a law license.
But it's also bringing to bear another court, if you will, which is the bar. That who's going to decide this is not going to be fellow Trump people. It's going to be the bar. And as long as the bar remains independent, then they can actually punish these people for being lawless. I mean, I think that's very strategically very, very clever on your part.
Oh, well, thanks. And I mean, yes, I think that's right. It's an organization that has not been captured yet, not for lack of trying. They did attempt to run Pam Bondi's brother for the DC bar presidency. Right. But as of now, to the best of my knowledge, the DC bar has not been captured yet. There are sort of longstanding traditions and norms in bar associations of being somewhat hands-off, of not wanting to over-sanction and over-discipline lawyers for good reasons and bad. The good being they don't want to discourage novel legal theories, particularly coming from new lawyers representing folks without a lot of money. The bad being that the whole thing is an old boys club and they don't want to punish each other. But I would posit that those norms are products of a bygone era, and that if the disciplinary commissions in DC and elsewhere want to maintain the integrity of the law profession and the rule of law more broadly, they are going to need to rise to the moment and take some cases that might make them a little uncomfortable and get a little bit of flack for it and just deal with it, because they're one of the few lines of protection we've got left.
Well, of course, Trump and his people regard the American Bar Association as the enemy, just as they regard universities as the enemy, as major law firms as the enemy, and major media as the enemy. And they have prohibited members of the Department of Justice, staff people, from participating in any ABA events. Right. So this is the creation of a different kind of society and a full-scale assault on civil society that the ABA ought to recognize, given that it's a target as well.
Mm-hmm. Right. And the ABA, although it promulgates the model rules of professional conduct that DC and the other states adopt, the DC Disciplinary Commission is separate and apart from the ABA. But yes, I think the ABA should be vocal about the attacks on the rule of law, as it has been to some extent. They've released some strong statements. They should, of course, say more. And to the extent that these rules can be interpreted or guidance can be issued in terms of how they can be applied to current realities, that would be really helpful. And I would encourage the ABA to think about doing that, because although they don't draft the rules that each jurisdiction adapts, they do have influence over how those rules are interpreted.
Welcome back. We got 12 different contributors here on Legal AF. Court of History, amazing. Sydney Blumenthal, Sean Wilentz, our resident historians. Look at the newsmakers that they bring onto the show. Julie K. Brown, who broke the story for the Miami Herald, dogged reporting about the Epstein case. Michael Wolff, award-winning journalist, about the Epstein case. Here we've got Seth Stern from the Freedom of the Press Foundation. We just had E. Jean Carroll come on Court of History with us. Senators, congresspeople, you want to be where Sydney and Sean are, and they're proud to be here, and we are too. We just added, just as a final, here we grow again, Adam Klasfeld of All Rise News has just joined Legal AF and has a new playlist as well. Come watch all of Adam's work here, breaking stories from within the courthouses and courtrooms, only on Legal AF. Take a minute, vote for our content and our contributors, and that you want us on the air by hitting that subscribe button. So important. That's why we ask for it. So until my next report, I'm Michael Popak. Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.